Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Quayson, and I am a professor of English at Stanford University. In Black Skin, White Masks, Frantz Fanon writes, "At first glance, it seems strange that the attitude of the anti-Semite can be equated with that of the Negrophobe. It was my philosophy teacher from the Antilles who reminded me one day, when you hear someone insulting the Jews, pay attention. He is talking about you." And I believed at the time he was universally right, meaning that I was responsible in my body and my soul for the fate reserved for my brother. Since then, I have understood that what he meant, quite simply, was that the anti-Semite is inevitably a Negrophobe. It is in the light of Fanon's remarks that I want to attempt this reading of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. On first encounter, the play seems pretty straightforward. Set in Renaissance Venice, the play centers on the repayment of the flesh bond insisted upon by the Jewish Shylock when the Christian Antonio comes to borrow 3,000 ducats from him for a period of 3 months to support his friend Bassanio in his quest for the hand of the beautiful Portia, who resides in the fictional and dreamy Belmont, an island some way from Venice. As we shall see, The Merchant of Venice can be discussed in terms of certain formulas present in a cluster of Shakespeare's comedies, except that the attack on Shylock's Jewishness by the Venetian Christians in the play comes to short-circuit or interrupt the standard Shakespearean formulas in such a way as to force us to rethink not just Shylock's comedic role, but the effect of the anti-Semitism on our understanding of discrimination. And it is in the light of this that Fanon's remarks on the interruption of the black bodily schema in the essay The Fact of Blackness in Black Skin, White Masks becomes especially useful. The essential formulas of The Merchant of Venice places it in a similar category as You Like It, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Twelfth Night, all of which have as their central concern the development of a companionate love relationship between young lovers. This contrasts with other comedies such as The Merry Wives of Windsor and Love's Labour's Lost, where the exploration is primarily among lovers of an older generation. With Much Ado About Nothing, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and Measure for Measure also generating a different exploration of companionate relationships that turn on a variety of alternative formulas and plot complications. And in Romeo and Juliet, even though the play starts with what appears to be an essentially comedic formula, it quickly descends into a painful tragedy of young love. I prefer the term companionate love relationship to the normally used one of romantic love, because I believe that the romantic comedies are not just about romance, they are also about friendship and equality between romantic lovers, even when these seem to lead to and are subsumed under the sign of marriages presided over by father figures at the end of the plays. The young lovers invariably have to overcome certain obstacles in order to properly consummate their companionate relationships. The impediments are at least of three kinds. First are misapprehensions about the nature of true love, such as we find in the case of Orlando in As You Like It, or of Duke Orsino in Twelfth Night. The second set of problems that the young lovers are supposed to negotiate are the negative sentiments of what we might describe as anti-comedic spirits. These are characters within the plays that hate anything to do with fun and that generally speak out against it, such as Malvolio in Twelfth Night and Jacques in As You Like It. The third tier of problems can fruitfully be placed under the label of problems of social context, or the dimension of social contradictions that have to be fully resolved for there to be a proper reintegration of the lovers back into society at large. The lovers find that the social context impose unbearable constraints and contradictions upon them, such as, say, in the parental sanctions at the start of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or the sense of political disorder in As You Like It. In response to this, the young characters escape their social environments and retreat into a green world away from home, such that the green world then acts as the forum in which they come to understand what love is. The confusions of their social environments are normally resolved ahead of multiple marriages at the end of the plays, with the anti-comedic spirits either suitably contained or voluntarily separating themselves from the fun represented in the marriages. This suggests an excision of the anti-comedic spirit, which, as we find at the end of The Merchant of Venice, means not just the seizing of Shylock's goods, but his enforced conversion into Christianity. In Twelfth Night, however, the twins Viola and Sebastian are shipwrecked and separated upon the island of Illyria. Viola presumes her brother to be dead and disguises herself as a boy to make her way, only to be cast into a highly confusing love plot that is already unfolding in Illyria. Shakespeare has various ways both of setting up the problems of the social context and also of resolving them. Sometimes the problems of the social context are expressed in such a way as not to be entirely separable from the articulation of the anti-comedic sentiments embodied either in individual characters or as part of the implied ethos of the world in question. In Twelfth Night, for example, the problem of the social context has a double focus, making itself seen partly in the sour character of Malvolio, as well as in the predominating spirit of Misrule, to be found in the household of Olivia, a wealthy countess. Note that the name Malvolio literally means ill will, and that Sir Toby Belch's name also refers to his excessive fun-loving nature, so that by this, the characters' names also serve to encapsulate what they are supposed to represent within the play. This is a point explained within a general theory of representation by Angus Fletcher in his book Allegory, The Theory of a Symbolic Mode. What Sir Toby Belch and his hapless sidekick Sir Andrew Aguecheek represent in Twelfth Night is the spirit of misrule. This is an inherently carnivalesque spirit that is dangerously detached from any sense of social responsibility. Thus, the comedic spirit in Twelfth Night is brought close to its potential opposite. The carnivalesque spirit of misrule is dangerous for self-governance, for the stability of domestic arrangements, and ultimately for the proper articulation of a socially responsible humor, which is also important for the flourishing of true love. Twelfth Night displays an attenuated form of problems of social context compared to As You Like It and A Midsummer Night's Dream, where there are specific problems of injustice and of parental injunctions, respectively, that are shown to pose recognizable risks for the lovers as well as for the social polity more generally. The Merchant of Venice compounds all the elements of Shakespearean romantic comedy by instituting a particular problem of social discrimination within the social context of Venice. That then prevents us from seeing the play simply as a formulaic Shakespearean comedy like the ones I have just mentioned. The play refuses to completely harmonize the contradictions that are laid out before us and is exemplary of a dramatized coexistence of unresolvable contradictions. For one thing, there are various interconnecting aspects of the social context that impinge upon any interpretation of the standard anti-comedic spirit of the other romantic comedies. At one level, Shylock is similar to other anti-comedic characters such as Jacques in As You Like It and Malvolio in Twelfth Night. Like Malvolio and Jacques, Shylock is the anti-comedic spirit that has to be exorcised or at least contained to enable true companionate love to flourish fully. But there's a major difference between Shylock and the other Shakespearean anti-comedic characters we have just seen. For unlike them, his Jewishness is an irreducible factor in the play. And the play interweaves a virulent anti-Semitic discourse whose ramifications are only properly to be understood when we cease reading it entirely as a comedy. As James Shapiro points out in his well-documented book, Shakespeare and the Jews, myths about Jews had a certain resilience that got refracted in The Merchant of Venice and in other plays of the early modern period. Shapiro notes that while myths about Jews may have varied, the ones that were most relevant to The Merchant of Venice were those that postulated that Jews participated in ritual murder, circumcision often being thought to be the first step to this, that they were usurers, usury being the illegal practice of lending money at unreasonable rates of interest, and that they were also mean-spirited and generally had a relentless antipathy toward Christians. In other words, the Jew was the prism through which social anxieties and phobias were refracted, oftentimes without any reference to real Jews themselves. As Shapiro also notes, the Jew continued to figure as a point of reference in early modern England for a wide variety of social and theological concerns that ultimately had little to do with Jews themselves. Echoes of what Fanon describes about the stereotypes of Black people in the fact of blackness may be seen here. For both Shylock and the other characters in the play, his Jewishness is relevant for defining all the social relationships in Venice. The word Jew is used more than the word Christian in the play. Jew is mentioned 70 times, while Christian is only used 22 times. Shylock is variously described by the Christians as the alien, the stranger cur, misbeliever, cutthroat dog, a kind of devil, and a faithless Jew, and they spit upon him. Shylock responds with great pain and bitterness to the anti-Semitism that he is exposed to, so that from both sides, his Jewishness short-circuits the process by which he may be reduced to a literary formula or trope within the dramaturgical schemas of Shakespearean romantic comedy. This is arguably not the case with Othello, where, as we saw in the episode on the play, all the insults that are directed at him occur behind his back and never to his face. At any rate, Othello allows the eponymous hero an undisguised tragic stature and centrality to the culture of Venice, which, joined to the blatant villainy of the white Iago, forces us to look well beyond the surface of Othello's skin color and into his fractured psyche. In the case of Shylock, his Jewish and racial difference are a critical cultural factor which consistently manifest themselves both in the self-expressions of Shylock himself and in the way he is perceived by the Christians. Shylock is a character who has to be read as a social stereotype and a dramaturgical formula at the same time. It is impossible to subsume the one under the other. At another level, the social context of the Merchant of Venice expresses a peculiar contradiction between economic rationality and cultural ethos. Shylock's own insider-outsider status allows us an unmediated entry into the conflation of culture and economy. As we have noted already, Shylock is spat upon by Antonio, completely denigrated by the Christians, but also reviled by his daughter Jessica and misunderstood by all. But to grasp the nature of his own hatred of the Christians, we have to attend to an important feature of the social context that expresses the cultural, economic contradictions that we hinted at earlier. Historically, every period saw denunciations of usury in England and elsewhere in Europe. In England of the last third of the 16th century, these denunciations occurred at the same time as money lending was being seen as an inescapable economic necessity. The concept of usury underwent a radical transformation between the usury statutes of 1571 and 1624. The landmark usury statute of 1571 permitted individuals to obtain 10% interest on loans. And in the usury statute of 1624, the House of Commons struck out the declaration in the statute suggesting that usury was against the law of God. In the period between the two statutes, usury itself as a concept shifted gradually from meaning any loan at interest to one that meant the giving of a loan at an exorbitant rate. By 1626, attitudes had shifted so much that English moneylenders could buy a copy of Moneymongers or the Usurer's Almanac, which set out, quote, the necessary tables of interest, the usurer's gain, and the borrower's loss. And yet, at the same time, despite the permission to lend money that was first stated in the 1571 statute, individuals who lent money at unacceptably excessive rates were routinely prosecuted. The economy of England in the early modern period had to accommodate the obvious necessity of new modes of business financing, while also struggling to confront some of the moral contradictions involved in money lending implicit in a strongly Christian worldview in the first place. The implied schism between interest and usury enabled a projection of the negative part of the equation elsewhere, while the more positive aspects were retained for definitions of economic rationality. And it was the Jews that were associated with the negative pole in stories of usury, both in literature and in popular belief. The social context of the Merchant of Venice illustrates this historical contradiction quite clearly. At one level, the Christian ethos of the play disavows the mode of business financing represented by Shylock. And yet, at the same time, precisely because the Venice of the play is a mercantile economy, the mode of business financing represented by Shylock is absolutely crucial for the maintenance of Venice's expansive and at the time imperial trading network. More important for our interpretation here, however, is that this contradiction between an implied Christian ethical order and a necessary economic practice, which was the material basis of that order, captures the conflation point between cultural economy and economic economy. The Christians have to be understood as not just exemplifying a specific kind of belief system, but as demonstrating a way of consolidating social exchanges that would ultimately undergird the economic exchanges themselves. This allows a reinterpretation of the partying spirit we see in the play. Belmont, a veritable dream world saturated with music and moonshine, is a place where there is no work. Portia's wealth, unlike the hard-won wealth of the Venetians, is not sustained by labor. She got it from her father who passed. Another way of interpreting this contradiction in the play is in terms of a split between an abstract instrumental sociocultural network that derives partly from a notion of intrinsic value and the attempt to selectively remove individuals from the notion of value according to their relevance in fulfilling the goals of the network. The operational word here is network, for the Christian characters are ultimately interested in consolidating a social networking apparatus. This social network, always firmly economic, is consolidated by entering into circuits of social circulation in which money and wealth are not allowed to define value, even while they are being made central to the socio-cultural circulation in the first place. In our own modern times, with the rapid expansion of capitalism and its incursions into the cultural industry, and also of all areas of everyday life, the economic logic is disguised as the expression of culture. Thus, If one wanted to say get a contract in Hollywood, one would hire an agent. The agent is nothing other than a cultural player, a networker whose networking expertise is placed at the service of the economic motive. That is to say, to get a lucrative contract so that the actor or artist is freed to deliver their cultural work. In The Merchant of Venice, we see a curious entanglement of the cultural and economic when the cultural refuses to acknowledge its dependence on the logic of the economy while being firmly sustained by it. What the play expresses is that the historical meeting point of emergent and residual values are played out across an intersecting relationship between economics and culture, but within which some elements of the society are victimized. Shylock absorbs the intensity of the stereotyping process of which he is clearly a victim and makes of it his own peculiar instinctual reflexes by which to visit vengeance upon Venetian society. One of the effects of the anti-Semitism in the play is that he comes to develop what might be described as a neurotic exactness born directly from his peculiar relationship to money and as a necessary agent of his business finance within the world of the play. In one of the most cited speeches of Merchant of Venice, Shylock appeals to a shared humanity. And this is what we see. He had disgraced me and handed me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what is reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his severance be by Christian example? Why revenge? The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. But even in this speech, we can read it in terms of an error of exactness. For Shylock seeks an egalitarian extension of commonality on the basis of a literal interpretation of what it is to be human. An interpretation that because he has the same anatomical features as the Christians, they ought to accept him as equal to them. But as Fanon might tell Shylock, society never refuses an egalitarian extension of humanity to its denigrated others solely on the basis of the presence or absence of human attributes. The refusal of recognition is often done by the invocation of invisible and intrinsic characteristics that cannot be challenged solely by referring to a common humanness. Shylock's neurotic exactness is born out of this dissociation from the social circuits of interaction, which, because of his contradictory relation between economic and cultural positions, he set himself in opposition to. When he refuses Bassanio's invitation to dine with him at some point in the play and refers to his Jewish antipathy to pork, he is also expressing the difficulty of entering the Christian's circuits of social circulation from the denigrated position of the marginalized. We are now firmly in Fanonian territory. As we saw in the episode on black skin, white masks, the primary effect of a racist environment is ultimately the fundamental interruption of the bodily schema of the oppressed and the incredible burden of having to explain their humanity to the hegemonic oppressive culture, even in the most banal everyday contexts. Even though Shylock is not black, the effect of the Christian's insult on him is similar to what Fanon describes in Black Skin, White Masks. In the court scene in Act 4, Scene 1, Shylock lays out to the Duke the reasons why he does not want to forfeit the flesh bond. And this is what we see. Shylock: I have possessed your grace of what I purpose, and by our holy Sabbath have I sworn to have the due and forfeit of my bond. If you deny it, let the danger light upon your charter and your city's freedom. You'll ask me why I rather choose to have a weight of carrion flesh than to receive 3,000 ducats. I'll not answer that, but say it is my humor. Is it answered? What if my house be troubled with a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it banned? What? Are you answered yet? Some men there are love not a gaping pig, some that are mad if they behold a cat, and others, when the bagpipe sings in the nose, cannot contain their urine. For affection, master of passion, sways it to the mood of what it likes or loathes. Now for your answer. As there is no firm reason to be rendered why he cannot abide a gaping pig, why he, a harmless necessary cat, why he, a wooling bagpipe, but of force must yield to such inevitable shame as to offend himself being offended. So can I give no reason, nor I will not, more than a lodged hate and a certain loathing I bear Antonio, and that I follow thus a losing suit against him. Are you answered? In Shakespeare's time, human personality was divided into four humors: blood, bile, melancholy, and phlegm, which were understood to define people's physical and mental health, as well as their personalities. This theory of the humors was derived from the studies of Hippocrates and Galen and various others during medical antiquity. But from a modern day perspective, what Shylock is expressing here is really a notion of phobias and neuroses, specifically relating to various animals and sounds. From the perspective of the Christians in the play, what Shylock tells them is nothing but a form of close mindedness and indeed madness. But for us, we're obliged to interpret Shylock's speech as a signal of the distortion of his emotional impulses because of how much anti Semitism he has been obliged to live with. For what Shylock is describing here is a nervous condition exemplified in some people's irrational responses to a mouse, or the playing of a bagpipe, or seeing a gaping pig, or a cat, but the source of which we might argue in his case does not derive from animals at all, but from the intensity of his mistreatment in the hands of the Christians. If you will recall from our discussion in the episode on Fanon, he speaks of nausea as one of the responses to being interpolated by the white gaze. This nausea is the emotional reflex of a persistent social judgment, a negative one, that Fanon struggles to deconstruct and yet is also deeply affected by. A similar thing seems to have happened with Shylock. For what we see is that his villainy is not intrinsic to his Jewishness, but is the product of the racist and anti Semitic social environment in which he is obliged to navigate. I think Fanon would have fully understood Shylock if they could hypothetically have met. And one might even say that given the close and altogether uncanny similarities between racism and anti Semitism, that Shylock would also have understood Fanon. For when you see an anti Semite, know that you are looking at a racist. Thank you very much. Remember to give a thumbs up if you like this episode, subscribe and share, hit the notifications bell so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes, and enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.